and welcome to our morning edition of Arirang News. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. President Jae-myung is set to embark on his first overseas trip since taking office earlier this month. He's scheduled to attend the G7 summit in Canada. The conflict between Israel and Iran intensifies as the two countries continue to exchange strikes for the fourth day. Millions of Americans took to the streets across the U.S. to protest against President Donald Trump. The demonstrations came as Trump hosted the country's largest military parade in decades in Washington, D.C. President Jae-myung is set to depart for Canada today for the G7 summit as his first foreign trip since taking office less than 2 weeks ago. Coordination is underway for talks with U.S. President Donald Trump on the sidelines of the summit, with trade at the top of his mind. Our presidential office correspondent Yoon Jung-min starts us off.
South Korea's new leader, Lee Jae-myung, embarks on his 3-day trip to Canada to attend the G7 summit, making his debut on the global diplomatic stage, less than 2 weeks since he was sworn in. His participation means more than just that, says the president's national security advisor Wi Sung-nak, following the 6-month-long leadership vacuum in Seoul.
Last year, South Korea's democracy met a crisis due to martial law. Having overcome the crisis, this will serve as the first chance on the international stage to send a message that democratic Korea is back.
President Lee is heading to Calgary on Monday, where he is expected to hold back-to-back meetings with leaders from a host of countries, which were invited as guests like Korea. The following day, he will attend the G7 expanded session in Kananaskis, where energy security will top the agenda. Lee will address the session to lay out Korea's visions for diversifying energy supply chains, as well as artificial intelligence and energy. Apart from that, coordination is underway for bilateral meetings with the group of 7 members, including the U.S. and Japan. This comes as the Trump administration's July deadline for tariff negotiations nears.
Through bilateral talks, we'll have an opportunity to strengthen friendly cooperation with major countries in terms of our national interest and pragmatic diplomacy. We will also make progress in discussing pending issues such as trade.
This year's Group of 7 meeting comes as the group celebrates 50 years of partnership, but also while the world is facing increasing instability, including in the Middle East. Eyes are also on whether the G7 will send a coordinated message towards China or Russia. It also remains to be seen whether President Lee will get to meet his Ukrainian counterpart, Volodymyr Zelensky, and whether he will attend the NATO summit slated for next week. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
So as we just heard, President Lee Jae-myung's trip to Canada is set to mark his debut on the global diplomatic stage. For more on what to expect, we're joined by Professor Andrew Millard, an assistant professor of international relations at Changwon National University. Professor Millard, thanks for joining us this morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Good morning. So, with so much happening around the world right now, what will be at the top of the agenda for the leaders at the G7 summit?
So we can sort of divide this into 2 main areas. So officially, the top of the agenda was set by the Canadian administration just over a week ago. And I think, as was predicted, security and peace was right at the very top. So we have a few different conflicts going on around the world. Energy security and digital transition was also a part of that. So the use of AI and quantum technology, and also economic security. So those were the official agendas set out just over a week ago. But of course, these summits, these are so important for, as you just mentioned before, the bilateral meetings that also take place, and behind the scenes, a lot of the unofficial meetings where the leaders will really sort of meet with each other and discuss all of the different issues happening. So in particular, I think the US and what is happening with US policies around the world will be a big part of this meeting. And of course, over the past few days, what is happening in Iran and Israel, this is also maybe going to change some of the official agenda.
Right, so this trip to Canada for the G7 summit marks Yi's first overseas trip since taking office, and he said he plans to focus on pragmatic diplomacy. So do you think we'll see that approach in action during this trip?
Oh, for sure. I mean, this is perfect timing. So we have President Lee, he's only taken office less than 2 weeks ago, and now he has not only his first overseas meeting, his first overseas trip, but he's meeting with the G7 leaders, the leaders of the 7 arguably most powerful countries in the world, plus we have Australia, India, Brazil, Ukraine, South Africa, all these other leaders as well. So this is really perfect timing for President Lee after that sort of 6-month void to go and meet these world leaders and say, Korea is back on the global stage. These are our foreign policies. These are domestic policies. These are what we're going to follow. However, the leaders, even though they don't really know President Lee very well, they will have done their homework. They will know that in the past, he has been a little bit more critical of Ukraine, of Zelensky himself, and they will know that the Democratic Party in Korea generally tends to be a little bit more pro-China, pro-North Korea, and their relations with the US and Japan are not always as strong as with other governments. So he will definitely have to follow pragmatic diplomacy.
Right, so if President Yi holds a separate bilateral meeting with US President Donald Trump, what key issues do you expect him to discuss there?
So as was mentioned in the short video before, trade. Without doubt, trade and the tariffs, this will be the priority for any sort of meetings that they have. In particular, the steel and aluminium tariffs, these are really going to quite hit South Korea quite hard. But of course, there'll also be talks on security. And like we just said, what is South Korea's policy towards China and North Korea going to look like? So maybe this is where we could see President Lee and President Trump having some sort of common ground. So we know in the past, Donald Trump, he has really liked Kim Jong-un. He's built in the past a good relationship. So maybe this is an area where they can build some good relations. And so when it then goes into those sort of trade negotiations, maybe there can be some room for negotiation. But we'll also look at things like what can South Korea, what can President Lee offer to America in return for reducing those tariffs?
Right, indeed. And there has been growing discussion in recent years about the possibility of South Korea possibly joining the G7. So what's your take on this?
So this one, you're right, this is for about 20 years, just under 20 years, South Korea has been observing in the G7 meetings. I think from 2008, they have been participating. So this issue of whether South Korea should join as a member, it's not a new one. It does have advantages and disadvantages. So the advantage would be politically very symbolically impactful for South Korea. Now, South Korea generally follows the same values and the same policies as most of the other G7 nations. So it's quite westernized in that way. However, if it does become a member, then it needs to think about what would be the reaction from China. So China has in the past been a little bit more critical of the G7 because it is very Western oriented. And as we know, South Korea wants to try to remain sort of a little bit neutral, sort of having good relations with the West, but as we said, also maintaining those good relations with China and the other countries in Asia as well. So it's possible. Would it have a huge impact on South Korea? I'm not so sure, but it could be good for Asia as well.
Right, and the Yi administration is also considering whether or not if the president should attend the NATO summit later this month. What are your thoughts on this? Do you believe participating in the summit would be beneficial for South Korea?
Without doubt. So this one, I think very strongly over the past few years, especially the past 2 or 3 years, South Korea has really built some good, strong relations with NATO. So through the NATO +4 mechanism, and also last year, for the first time, South Korea joined the ministers' meeting, which was hugely significant. And now, what NATO is looking for, it's looking for reliable partners, partners it can trust with security issues. And so South Korea, it's spent these past few years building this relation. So if South Korea now says, oh, maybe we should join, maybe we shouldn't join, maybe this is going to take away from that reliability. And importantly, especially for Europe right now, they're talking about really boosting their own defense, becoming sort of security autonomous. Now, for South Korea, this could therefore have huge potential for defense trading. So we know back in 2022, there was this huge deal with Poland worth $13 billion for defense expenditure. So we know the Europeans, the NATO countries, they're looking for more countries to boost their defense with. And South Korea, this is really a huge opportunity for them. So yes, they should be at the NATO summit.
All right, Professor Miller, I guess we'll have to see how it goes. I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for your insight. We appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
President Lee Jae-myung has completed key appointments to the Office of National Security. Chief of Staff Kang Hoon-sik said Sunday that retired three-star General Kim Hyun-dong has been named First Deputy National Security Advisor. Kim, who formerly served as Chief of Staff at the Ground Operations Command, will oversee national defense and security policy. Lee Mung-sun, South Korea's current ambassador to Canada, was appointed Second Deputy Advisor and will be in charge of foreign affairs. Oh Hyun-ju, the country's first female envoy to the Holy See, will serve as the third deputy advisor, focusing on economic security. Also on the same day, Ha Jong-woo, head of the Future AI Center at South Korean tech giant Naver, was tapped as the inaugural senior secretary for AI and future strategy. And marking 60 years of normalizing diplomatic relations, the Japanese embassy in Seoul will hold a reception to celebrate the milestone on Monday. As President Lee Jae-myung is scheduled to fly to Canada, his office is reportedly considering a video message to mark the occasion. The Korean embassy in Tokyo will also host a separate reception on Thursday. Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba is expected to attend personally. During the 50th anniversary of diplomatic normalization in 2015, President Park Geun-hye and Prime Minister Shinzo Abe attended receptions hosted by each other's embassies. The 1965 Treaty on Basic Relations was signed some 20 years ago after South Korea was liberated from Japan's colonization when the imperial power surrendered, ending World War II. Meanwhile, on inter-Korean relations, President Lee Jae-myung vows to quickly restore suspended dialogue channels with North Korea to ease military tensions and foster a peaceful atmosphere. This message was delivered on his Facebook on Sunday, on the 25th anniversary of the June 15 Declaration, which outlined agreements for reconciliation and was signed by former President Kim Dae-jung and late former North Korean leader Kim Jong-il in 2000. He went on to say that his government will end hostile acts that are wasteful and resume dialogue and cooperation. He expressed concerns over tensions in the border areas, saying that the peninsula has retreated to the past Cold Era in recent years and vowed to make efforts for peace, not just for security, but for the economy. Tensions between Israel and Iran intensify as the conflict enters its fourth day, with Israel striking missile sites in Iran and Iran retaliating with hundreds of ballistic missiles. Over 200 people have been killed in Iran, while at least 14 people have been killed in Israel. There are also rising fears of further escalation and disruption to regional energy supplies. Our Iani has the latest.
Israel and Iran continue to exchange missile strikes as the conflict between the two countries enters its fourth day. Overnight Monday, Israel carried out renewed airstrikes targeting surface-to-surface missile sites in western and central Iran. Multiple large explosions, including at a foreign ministry building, rocked Tehran, with energy infrastructure also hit. Iran launched a new wave of missiles and drones at Israel late on Sunday. The operation involved hundreds of ballistic missiles aimed at homes and infrastructure, Iran's semi-state Mehr News reported. Iran's national news agency confirmed the death of the intelligence chief of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and 2 other generals in Israeli attacks on Sunday. Tehran's health ministry on the same day said the death toll in Iran has surpassed 200. It also said over 1,000 people had been hospitalized. Authorities in Israel say at least 14 people have been killed since the strikes began. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told Fox News on Sunday that the goal is to eliminate Iran's nuclear and missile threats. He also said that while not the main objective, the attacks could lead to regime change in Iran.
Could certainly be the result because the Iran regime is very weak. I think it's basically left with 2 things. It's plans to have atomic bombs and ballistic missiles. That's basically what Iran has. They certainly don't have the people. 80% of the people would throw these theological thugs out.
During a cabinet meeting also on Sunday, Iran's president warned that his country's response would become more severe if Israeli attacks escalate.
We will give a powerful response to any aggression they may commit.
U.S. President Donald Trump shared his feelings while speaking to reporters, saying it's time for a deal and we'll see what happens, but sometimes they have to fight it out. Meanwhile, U.S. oil prices rose by around 3% on Sunday after Israeli strikes hit oil and gas facilities in Iran. 이은희, Arirang News.
Now, over in the U.S., millions of protesters took to the streets over the weekend to protest against President Donald Trump. Supporters of Trump and those opposing the president clashed, with one person shot and killed by a member of a peacekeeping team in Utah. Our Lee Seung-jae has this report.
June 14th marked both the U.S. Army's 250th founding anniversary and U.S. President Donald Trump's birthday. The first major military parade in the U.S. in 34 years in Washington, D.C. on Saturday was met with nationwide protests against the U.S. leader in what are being called the No Kings protests. While the majority of the protesters were said to be peaceful, riots were reported in some areas. Over in Salt Lake City, Utah, one protester was shot and killed when a member of a peacekeeping team at the protest opened fire. The shooter was aiming for another person who had apparently been seen aiming a rifle at protesters, but instead shot a bystander who died later in the hospital. Over in Virginia, a man intentionally drove his SUV through a crowd of protesters, striking at least one person. The mostly peaceful protest in Los Angeles turned violent after rocks, bricks, and bottles were thrown at police. Hours before nationwide protests were taking place on Saturday, President Trump paid tribute to soldiers to mark the 250th anniversary of the founding of the Army.
Our souls are filled with gratitude for every generation of warriors who have worn the uniform all the way back to the very beginning. So to every veteran across our land, and right here in our nation's capital, including 6 recipients of the Congressional Medal of Honor, we love you, we honor you, and we salute your noble service to our flag and to our country.
Thousands attended the military parade in the U.S. Capitol, which was dampened by rain. Some 7,000 soldiers, 150 military vehicles, and 50 aircraft took part in the parade. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
While most of us are still planning that someday trip, one Turkish traveler has already stamped her way through all 76 Korean heritage sites in just 2 months. Our Park Hyo-bin brings us our story.
While most Koreans have barely scratched the surface of the country's rich heritage, one foreign traveler has gone the distance, visiting all 76 cultural treasures from Ganghwa Dolmen sites to the Museongseowon Confucian Academy in Cheonggup City. Aisha, a Korean language teacher from Turkey, began her journey in April at Suwon Hwasong Fortress and wrapped it up in just 2 months. When asked to name her favorite site, she said it was impossible to choose just one.
I think you really have to break it down into categories. If we're talking about the most photogenic place, definitely Pocheon Art Valley. But if I had to pick somewhere that felt both very Korean and somehow exotic, I'd say Naksansa Temple. And when I went to Hwahue Village in Andong, I was honestly speechless.
She also said the driving force to visit all the key Korean heritage sites was the stamps. The stamp is at the heart of the Korean Heritage Passport Tour, where participants receive a special passport and collect stamps at 76 designated sites across 10 themed routes.
My husband first told me about the program, but the moment I got my very first stamp, I was like, wow, this feels amazing. There was this powerful sense of achievement that made me want to keep going. And I guess another reason was, I wanted to be the Turkish person who knows Korea best.
The Korean Heritage Passport Tour is part of the Visit Korean Heritage campaign, launched in 2020 by the Korea Heritage Agency and Korea Heritage Service. It is an immersive program designed to promote the beauty and value of Korea's national heritage. Since its official launch in May 2023, nearly 400 people have completed the full tour so far.
We deliberately included lesser-known sites outside the Seoul metropolitan area. Since last year, interest has remained strong. So far, we've received around 260,000 applications, and we expect the number to hit 400,000 by the end of this year.
As for Aisha, her Korean journey is far from over. In fact, it's only just begun.
I'll travel Korea until the day I die, seriously. I'll keep going until there's not a single step in Korea I haven't walked. Right now, I'm planning to visit all the cities I haven't been to yet, or the ones I passed through too quickly. That's my goal for the next year.
But it continues with a deep love for Korea. One step, one city, one story at a time. Park Hoo-bin, Arirang News.
Now let's take a look at some stories from around the world with our Ji. Good morning, Ji.
Good morning, Eunji.
So, Ji, let's begin with the latest updates on the Russia-Ukraine conflict. A strike on a Ukrainian oil refinery has been confirmed. Fill us in on this.
Right. Russia confirmed a major strike in Ukraine targeting a key oil refinery. At the same time, it says Ukrainian drones attacked its drone production facility. Russian Defense Ministry officials reported that a coordinated air and sea missile strike hit an oil refinery in Ukraine's Poltava region overnight on Sunday. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky condemned the strike as an assault on Ukraine's energy infrastructure and said it was conducted after the Americans asked us not to strike at Russian energy facilities. In a separate incident on the same day, Moscow reported that Ukrainian drones struck a drone factory near Yelabuga in Tatarstan, causing a fire and killing at least one person. Russian air defense said they intercepted 6 Ukrainian drones. The details of the strike on the drone factory were confirmed by Ukraine. With a massive manhunt underway in the U.S. state of Minnesota after the shootings of Democratic state lawmakers, authorities on Sunday found the car used by the suspect, who allegedly posed as a police officer while committing the crime. Authorities say a 57-year-old suspect identified as Vance Luther Bolter, disguised in a police-style uniform and latex mask, carried out coordinated shootings at 2 locations in the Minneapolis suburbs in the early hours of Saturday morning. State Senator John Hoffman and his wife in Champlin were shot and critically wounded first, before former House Speaker Melissa Hortman and her husband were killed at their home in Brooklyn Park. Officers confronted the suspect at Hortman's residence, but Bolter escaped on foot. His car was recovered along with a hit list, which included the names of around 70 Democratic politicians. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz called the shooting a politically motivated assassination, and the FBI issued a $50,000 reward for information leading to the suspect's capture. In India, at least 4 people were killed and more than 30 others injured on Sunday after a bridge collapsed at a popular tourist location. According to reports, at least 20 people fell into the water when the bridge over the Indrayani River in Kundamala, Pune, collapsed due to heavy monsoon rain. Search and rescue efforts are ongoing for those who remain unaccounted for. Despite being flagged as structurally unsound, enforcement lapses allowed visitors as well as bicycles to continue using the footbridge. Authorities warn the death toll could rise as rescue operations continue.
We are We're in for a day of heavy rain in many parts of the country. We saw downpours overnight in parts of the central region with heavy rain advisories issued. Well, right now, rain is pounding down on Jeju Island, which is under heavy rain advisory, with around 20 millimeters per hour expected until this morning before it tapers off. The rest of the country will see rain until this afternoon. And the southern coast can expect 10 to 40 millimeters of rainfall, while the capital area and Chungcheongdo provinces could see 5 to 20 millimeters of showers. But once the rain clears, we will see blue skies emerge through that clouds, and the sun will be strong. Seoul and Gwangju will be reaching up to 28 degrees, Daegu topping out at 30 degrees Celsius, but high humidity could make it feel muggier today. Temperatures will be around 30 degrees Celsius for the time being, and we also have more rain in the forecast for later in the week. Nationwide rain is in the forecast for Friday and Saturday. Please stay safe in the rain and heat.
Now that's all we have for this morning. Arirang News will be back at 5 p.m. Korea time. Thanks for watching.